She walked in to fire someone, but the melody drifting out of the dimly lit room made her freeze in her tracks at the door. Catherine Caldwell, a billionaire mother known for her cold, commanding presence, stood silently as a soft lullaby echoed in the air. It was past midnight in the empty corporate office, and under the fluorescent glow, she saw a sight she never expected. Her 6-year-old autistic son, Noah, peacefully asleep in the arms of the janitor she was about to dismiss. The janitor, Grace, a humble black woman with gentle eyes, sat on the floor with Noah cradled against her, humming a soothing tune. She rocked him slowly, oblivious to the astonished mother watching from the doorway. Catherine's heart pounded. Just minutes ago, she had been marching down the hallway, anger burning in her chest, ready to finally get rid of the unnecessary staff member who, in her eyes, had overstepped her bounds. But now, Catherine couldn't utter a word. The scene before her was so tender, so unthinkable, that it left her utterly speechless. Her lips parted, yet no sound came out. As she clutched the door frame for support, Catherine felt something stirring within her, something she hadn't felt in years. Watching Grace hold and comfort her usually inconsolable child, Catherine's icy resolve began to melt. For the first time, this powerful, wealthy woman was at a loss. All her reasons for coming here evaporated in an instant, replaced by a single overwhelming feeling: gratitude. Grace continued singing softly, unaware of her audience. Noah's tiny hand clung to the fabric of Grace's uniform, his face relaxed and angelic. Every now and then, a gentle hiccup would escape his lips as remaining tears dried on his cheeks. To Catherine, it was like witnessing a miracle. Her son, who often could not sleep or be soothed by even the best therapists money could buy, was resting calmly to the sound of a simple lullaby. A lullaby sung by the very woman Catherine had written off as insignificant. At that moment, Catherine realized she was witnessing something money could never accomplish. She felt a lump in her throat, emotions she'd long suppressed now rushing to the surface. She didn't know whether to cry, to apologize, or simply to keep watching in awe. She just knew that nothing would ever be the same after this night. If you believe in the power of simple acts of kindness, please subscribe. Catherine Caldwell believed that showing softness only led to pain. As the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, she was accustomed to power, control, and results. In her penthouse office high above the city, everything was usually immaculate and in its place, just the way she liked it. Everything except the one part of her life she couldn't control: her son, Noah. Noah was 6 years old and on the autism spectrum. He was nonverbal. Raising him alone was the one challenge Catherine's wealth could not simply solve. She had poured money into specialists, therapies, and caregivers, but nothing truly broke through Noah's isolated world. At the office, while Catherine reviewed quarterly reports that morning, Noah sat on a plush rug with a tablet, tracing shapes on the screen. He hadn't made a sound in hours. Catherine told herself that at least he wasn't screaming. That was the bar for a good day, no meltdowns. As she perused a financial report, Catherine's attention was broken by a soft knock on the open door. It was Grace, the cleaning lady, quietly waiting with her cart to tidy up the office. Grace offered a polite smile, but Catherine barely looked up. To Catherine, Grace was practically invisible, a background fixture meant to do her job and not interfere. She certainly wasn't someone Catherine cared to know anything about. In her mind, The janitor's presence in the executive suite was a reminder of things out of place, of imperfections yet to be cleaned. While Catherine tried to ignore the woman's presence, Noah suddenly shifted. The boy's attention left his tablet, drawn by something on Grace's cart, a small, colorful feather duster. He stood up and approached the janitor hesitantly, attracted by the bright colors and the gentle jingling sound it made as it moved. Grace noticed the child's curiosity and turned slowly, crouching to Noah's level. She offered the feather duster with a warm smile. "Would you like to touch it?" Grace asked softly. Noah gently reached out, brushing his fingers against the soft feathers. A tiny smile flickered on his lips at the sensation. Catherine looked up, startled to see her son engaging with someone, especially a stranger, and even more startled to see a hint of a smile on his usually serious face. For a moment, she was curious rather than angry, but as Noah reached out further, he lost his balance on his unsteady little feet. Grace instinctively put out an arm to steady him, her hand lightly on his shoulder to prevent a fall. That snapped Catherine out of her trance. She leapt up from her desk, heart lurching with protective fear. "Don't touch him!" she barked, her voice sharper than she intended. In an instant, Noah recoiled, his brief moment of joy collapsing into frightened confusion. He flinched at his mother's tone and stumbled backward onto the floor, dropping the tablet, his face scrunched up, the beginnings of a wail in his throat. Catherine rushed over and scooped Noah into her arms before he could start screaming. She held him tightly, patting his back, but her eyes were fixed in an icy glare on Grace. Grace had scrambled back to her feet, eyes wide with alarm and apology. I'm sorry, ma'am," Grace stammered, wringing her hands. "He almost fell, and I just reacted." "You just overstepped," Catherine snapped, hugging Noah protectively. Her son buried his face in her shoulder, whimpering now. Grace opened her mouth to say something, but Catherine silenced her with a raised hand. "Don't you ever put your hands on my child again. That is not your job." The words were like ice. Catherine's heart was pounding, partly from the scare of seeing Noah almost fall, and partly from a rage fueled by fear and pride. She had trusted no one to handle Noah properly, and certainly not a janitor with no credentials or invitation. Grace's kind face fell. She lowered her gaze and nodded. "I understand. I'm sorry," she murmured. Noah was now softly crying into Catherine's silk blouse. Without another word, Catherine turned away, carrying her son toward a small couch in the office to comfort him and inspect for any harm. With her back turned, she coldly added, "Just go back to your work." Eyes brimming with quiet hurt, Grace collected her supplies. As she slowly backed out of the office, she dared one last look at Noah. The boy peeked over his mother's shoulder, tears on his cheeks, his small hand reaching back toward the colorful duster still lying on the floor where he dropped it. Grace's heart ached at the sight. She knew that cry all too well. The cry of a frightened child who didn't understand why the warmth of a moment was taken away. But there was nothing she could do. Not now. Catherine heard Grace's cartwheels squeak as the janitor hurried down the hall. For a moment, guilt tugged at Catherine's chest. She hadn't meant to frighten Noah further. She was just terrified of anyone mishandling her fragile son. Yet, as Noah's sobs grew, Catherine found herself overwhelmed not just with guilt, but with frustration. Frustration at Grace for stepping in without permission, at herself for losing her temper, and at the whole situation that had spiraled out in seconds. If only Grace had not interfered, or if only Noah wasn't so delicate, she thought bitterly. An ugly mix of shame and pride boiled inside her. Catherine calmed Noah as best she could, gently bouncing him until his tears subsided. But her own heart was still racing. Once Noah settled, quietly hiccuping with his head against her shoulder, Catherine sat back at her desk. She held him in her lap, one arm protectively around him as she attempted to resume working one-handed. It was futile. Her mind kept replaying the moment. The truth was that Grace had only tried to help, and Noah had been happy, even if just for a second. The image of that tiny smile on his face as he touched the feather duster nudged at Catherine's conscience. Still, her pride wouldn't let her fully accept she'd overreacted. Instead, she redirected the blame. In her mind, Grace was the problem. Maybe the janitor had crossed a line. Maybe she needed to remember her place. Catherine latched onto that thought. Yes, Grace needed to remember her place. As the day wore on, Catherine's conviction hardened. That afternoon, Catherine made a curt phone call to the building's facilities manager. She demanded that Grace be removed from her duties near Catherine's office, effective immediately. As one of the building's owners, Catherine's word was effectively law, and the manager quickly agreed to take care of it. Catherine hung up feeling vindicated. It was for the best, she told herself. After all, what if Grace had accidentally hurt Noah in her overstepping? No, Catherine wouldn't risk any variables when it came to her son. In her world, problems were solved with money and authority, not trust. Still, as she watched Noah sleep on the couch that afternoon, a nagging doubt crept in. Why did she feel like she might be making a mistake? Hours later, as evening settled, the office was nearly empty. Catherine was still at her desk finishing an urgent report while Noah grew restless. It was almost 8 p.m. when she finally shut her laptop with a weary sigh. She gathered Noah's things and took his hand, leading him toward the elevators. The hallway was silent and dim, and Noah whimpered at the unsettling echoes of their footsteps. Catherine paused to put his noise-canceling headphones over his ears and handed him his favorite plush toy, trying to ward off a meltdown. Near the exit, Catherine noticed a thin strip of light under the supply closet door. Grace's usual workspace. She frowned. Grace was supposed to have left by now. Why was that light still on? Before she could think further, Noah suddenly yanked free of her grasp. Drawn by a soft humming sound coming from the slightly ajar closet door, he pushed it open and slipped inside. Catherine's heart jumped into her throat. "Noah, wait!" she called, rushing after him. She stepped through the doorway, ready to pull her son away and confront Grace once and for all. But she froze. What she saw inside made her breath catch in her throat. What would you do if you were in Catherine's shoes right now? Let us know in the comments. With tears she didn't realize were forming, Catherine continued to watch as Grace gently ran her fingers through Noah's hair, singing in a low, soothing voice. It was an old melody, one Catherine vaguely recognized from childhood, though she could never remember the words. The tension slowly drained from Noah's small body as he sank into a peaceful drowsiness against Grace. Catherine felt rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the scene. For years, she had longed for something like this, someone who could reach Noah, a calm night with no screams or stress. Now that it was unfolding in front of her, she was stunned. A strange mix of relief and heartache swelled in her chest. Relief that Noah was calm, safe, and in caring arms, and heartache that those arms were not her own. Grace finally looked up and noticed Catherine standing there. In an instant, the lullaby fell silent, and Grace's eyes went wide with fear. She had been caught doing exactly what she was told not to, holding and comforting Noah. Grace's instincts as an employee kicked in. She tried to rise, to apologize, but the small sleeping boy in her arms made it difficult to move without disturbing him. Her voice trembled as she began, "Mom, I'm so sorry. Catherine quickly stepped forward, her hand raised, not in anger, but in a plea for quiet. "Shh," she whispered, kneeling down beside Grace and her son. Up close, Catherine could see Noah's face, peaceful against Grace's shoulder, and hear the faintest echoes of the lullaby still hanging in the air. Catherine shook her head gently. "Don't stop, please." Her tone was nothing like the harsh bark from that morning. It was soft, almost fragile. Grace blinked in surprise. Unsure, she hesitated, then resumed humming the gentle melody a little while longer, her eyes never leaving Catherine's face for permission. Catherine simply nodded, tears shining in her own eyes. They stayed like that for another minute until the song reached its tender end. Noah remained asleep, breathing evenly. When the lullaby ended, silence settled in the closet. Grace gently adjusted Noah's weight in her lap. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, her eyes downcast. "I know I shouldn't have picked him up, ma'am. He was wandering in the hall crying, and I just couldn't leave him like that." She looked on the verge of tears herself, fearing the consequences of her actions now that the lullaby was over. If you need to fire me, I understand." Grace was resigning herself to the punishment she expected, but there was a subtle quiver in her voice, not for losing a job, but at the thought of not seeing Noah again. Catherine felt a stab of shame. Just hours ago, she was ready to do exactly that. Fire this woman. Now that idea felt unconscionable. She slowly reached out a hand, not to threaten or scold, but to touch Grace's arm lightly. "I'm not going to fire you," Catherine said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. A tear finally escaped the corner of Catherine's eye. I owe you an apology, Grace. I was wrong." Grace dared to raise her eyes. She saw not the wrathful executive from earlier, but a broken-hearted mother on the verge of tears. Catherine continued, voice wavering, "All day I was so angry at you. I thought you had overstepped, that you could never understand my son or our situation." She swallowed hard. But I was the one who didn't understand. Carefully, Catherine slipped her arms under Noah to take him back. He whimpered and clutched at Grace's shirt, even in his sleep, not wanting to let go. Catherine's heart twisted at the sight. After a moment, Noah relaxed into his mother's embrace, still calm from Grace's lullaby. Catherine realized then just how safe her little boy had felt with Grace. Cradling Noah, Catherine sat on the floor beside Grace now. No traces of her earlier pride remained. "How did you do it?" she asked softly. Her eyes searched Grace's face in wonder. "He's never warmed up to anyone like that. He usually can't stand being touched when he's upset. Yet with you, he just melted." Grace offered a timid smile as she wiped one of her own eyes. "I'm not magic," she said softly. "I just sang to him. My mama used to sing that song to me and I sang it to my boy when he was little and scared." She hesitated, unsure if she should continue, but Catherine's gentle, curious gaze encouraged her. Taking a shaky breath, Grace continued, "My son, David, he was autistic, like Noah. Nonverbal, too. When he got overwhelmed, nothing ever reached him except music. A gentle song, a soft hum. It always calmed him down when nothing else would." Catherine absorbed those words, feeling them sink deep into her heart. In her arms, Noah slept soundly, evidence of Grace's understanding and kindness. For all the fortune and experts Catherine had at her disposal, it was this gentle janitor, armed with nothing more than a lullaby and a heart full of empathy, who succeeded where everyone else failed. Catherine bowed her head, overcome with remorse. "Grace, I treated you terribly," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can you ever forgive me?" Grace's eyes widened, and she shook her head vigorously. "There's nothing to forgive, Mrs. Caldwell," she whispered. "You were scared for your child. I understand that. I never held it against you." Grace looked down modestly. "I'm just glad I could help," she murmured. For a long moment, the two women sat on the floor in that small room, united by the sleeping child between them and the quiet understanding forming in the space of their silence. If this moment has touched your heart as deeply as it did Catherine's, please subscribe to our channel. Catherine offered to drive Grace home that night so they could continue talking. As they walked out side by side into the night, Catherine softly used Grace's first name, a simple gesture that made Grace smile through her tears. What had begun with anger and fear was turning into an unexpected friendship. Catherine knew this wasn't an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter for them all. Catherine didn't wait to show her gratitude. The next day, she offered Grace a new position in their lives, not as a janitor, but as Noah's caregiver and a part of their family. Grace accepted at once. Soon, Noah's laughter returned to their home, as Grace's gentle lullabies filled their world with warmth. In the end, Catherine learned a lesson more valuable than all her wealth. She finally understood that value isn't measured by wealth, but by the ability to truly connect with another human being. The billionaire mother, who once stood alone and cold, now had a friend by her side, a happy child in her arms, and a heart forever humbled.